Mr. Breen, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
You know what? I am not too bad. Pretty excited. Our first video lecture of the year.
I know. Can't you just hear the students like, it's been 3 whole days of AP World History and we haven't even done any content yet. Oh my goodness. They don't know
We're
what they're
doing it today. Woo!
they're going to want to go back on that so
I know.
quickly.
All right,
All
Mr.
right.
Breen, what are we talking about today?
We're talking Africa. We're going to hop over to our first major continental region. We're going to talk about Africa. Now, we're not going to talk about all of Africa, and this is definitely not to be meant to be an exhaustive African history presentation because that would take us forever. Specifically, we want to talk about a handful of social and cultural movements. And when we talk about movement, we're going to talk about the idea of a physical movement and the idea of change within a society. And then we're also going to break down some of the key themes within AP World History, specifically culture, society, and economics. So I think we're ready to get into this, and let's break down what we're going to take out of this presentation.
That sounds delightful. Now, Mr. Breen, if I'm a student, how do I know what to take notes on?
Well, we are always going to give you a list of learning objectives. And these aren't just something for you to be like, I've been doing this since I was in middle school. I know what an objective is. These are the absolute bare minimum takeaways from any presentation from a knowledge standpoint that you just need to know. And when I say minimum, I mean just that the smallest kernel of knowledge that you could pluck out of the presentation. So we have four relatively easy to identify objectives for this particular presentation. I'm just going to break down a little bit of the verbiage in each one. When we say identify, you should be able to actually have an example. So anytime you've been hit with the identify verb inside of an objective, like this first one, identify how the Bantu migrations influenced African culture, we want you to actually be able to identify, like be able to come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples, if at all possible. Just a helpful hint for all AP students, at least 2. You should always be able to have at least 2 identifiables when we say identify. When we say list, we want you to actually be able to create a list. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. I don't care how you do it, but you should be able to list something when you're asked to list traditional African cultural values. Create a list. Name the major trade route in Africa. This isn't a great man history class. We don't do just large scale events all the time, but there are certain things you just need to know and they need to be able to roll off the tongue. So when we have any name type of objective verb, that's something specific. So be able to name. And then when we say explain, be able to break down something. All right. This is the importance. This was important because, all right. So in this particular objective, we're asking you the what is the major trade route, and the why. Why is this trade route important? And in this case, we're using influenced as the key part of that second clause in the objective. How did the trade route influence the development of Africa? So that's suggesting some sort of change, something dynamic, right? And then lastly, we're going to talk about a singular person, a man named Mansa Musa, and how he influenced or changed the development of West Africa in particular. So those are our 4 major objectives. And by the end of the presentation, you should be able to literally check off each one of those, and that's how you know you have complete notes. Ready to move on?
Yes, we are. So what we're going to start with today is a little bit of geography. And the one thing we want AP World students to know is when we give you a map, it is really, really important to look at it. Really important. So what you see here are 2 maps. On the left side, you see a physical map of Africa. And on the right side, you see a regional map. Starting with the physical map, when you take a look at any physical map in AP World, we don't want you to just look for the physical features. So yeah, I see there's the Saharan Desert and the Kalahari Desert and the Congo River and the Great Rift Valley. And I definitely see the beige areas and the green areas, but that is not enough. In AP World History, you really got to think about how these different physical areas are going to impact the way a society develops. So for example, if you were living right here on the outskirts of the Sahara, either the northern part or the southern part, you have to think about, okay, so these are on the outskirts of the desert, which means there's probably not going to be a whole lot of great farming land, which means they're not going to be able to stay in one place and farm, which means they're going to be nomadic to be able to get the resources that they need in order to survive. But then you take a look at these really deep green areas and your first thought might be, oh, serious, awesome, lots of vegetation, that's got to be farming. But that's not quite how dark green areas work. This just indicates the level of vegetation, and the darker the green is, more vegetation there is. And so areas like this along the Congo River, that's going to be more like a rainforest. That's going to be hugely densely populated with vegetation. Those aren't great areas to farm in. The moisture and humidity alone is going to eat the crops away. So in regions like this, there's not going to be a whole lot of farming. Now, that doesn't mean that these people are going to be nomadic. No, they have access to resources from trees. They have access to resources from rivers like fish and, nuts, or they're going to have access to anything that is going to be edible from those two resources. So they're actually going to probably have a plentiful food supply and are going to be able to stay in one place, but they are not going to be able to produce their own food supply. The environment produces it for them and they just grab and take. It will be the lighter green regions where you're going to see the farming take place. That there still is vegetation there, but it's not super dense. So these are going to be like grasslands where people are actually going to be able to produce their own food via farming and sustain themselves and be sedentary. So again, when you're looking at a map, you got to dig a little bit deeper than just looking at what the geographical regions or the geographical features are. Now, on the right-hand side with the regional map, the reason we're giving you a regional map this time is because we will rarely, if ever, talk about Africa as a whole. It's just too big of a continent. So we need you to know the different regions because this is what we're going to refer to. Today, we are primarily going to be talking about West Africa. And that is because that's where the Bantu migrations originate. Now, the Bantu migrations happened a long, long time ago, and it took about a millennia to complete the migration. For migration, that just means movement, right? So as you guys can see in the map, the Bantu started in West Africa, but then moved to parts of Eastern Africa and parts of Southern Africa, all still below the Saharan Desert. And anything below the Saharan Desert is called Sub-Saharan Africa. So historians and archaeologists and anthropologists believe that the Bantu migrated for two major reasons, not regions, geez. One was an increase in population. Now, the Bantu were farmers, and they were really, really good at it. And usually when you farm, you end up with a food surplus. And every time you have a food surplus, your population tends to get bigger, tends to explode. So what they think happened is that farming was really good for a substantial period of time and the population increased. But then those grasslands that we referred to on the previous slide started to dry up, which means now they don't have enough fertile farmland to be able to sustain the population. And at this point, you have like one of two possibilities. You either let your civilization die of starvation, or you move to find more farmland. And that's what the Bantu did. So they moved south and they move east. The cool thing about the Bantu migrations are the effects that it had on the African people, because as the Bantu migrate, they settle in different parts, right? They didn't just go from here to here, like every single Bantu started here and you ended up with every single Bantu here. No, that's not how it works. You probably had some Bantu staying here and some Bantu staying here. And they did that all along the migration routes, which means every place that the Bantu settled, they spread their language. And so this leads to a common language, or at least a basic language for sub-Saharan African people. They all speak some kind of dialect of the Bantu language. Also, as the Bantu moved, they brought their cultural values with them. So most of sub-Saharan Africa has common cultural values as a result of Bantu migration. And as well, the Bantu spread their knowledge of farming and ironworks, which means whatever regions they spread to where they could farm. In most regions, in fact, almost all regions, they spread the iron making capability, which is huge for the development of African culture. So the Bantu migrate. It leads to all these commonalities, probably the most important of which are those common cultural values.
Now, one of the things that comes out of those migrations, though, is that each one of the different communities of people that goes on the move, because you would reference this idea that there wasn't one just single wave movement of people from point A to point B. We saw people dispersing all across the map. Certain people will stay in certain areas. And if we go back and think about the geographic feature map that you showed us at the beginning of the presentation, each one of those different regions is very specific in terms of its regional geography. So you have certain areas that were grasslands, certain areas that were desert, certain areas that were temperate, certain areas that are like dense rainforest, forests, and impenetrable jungle. And each one of the different groups of people that sets up and stays in a particular region is going to be highly dependent on each other in order to make survival work. And so the traditional African values that emerge after the Bantu migration tend to be very group centered. And if we were to juxtapose or compare and contrast that idea with Western civilizations, and when I say Western, I mean the United States, Canada, West Europe, Australia, we start to see that there's this very big difference between this idea of the rugged individual, somebody who's out there on their own making it work, and the group mentality that comes when you live in a very harsh environment. And in Western civilizations, we have it relatively easy. We have easy access to money or capital. We have easy access to food resources. We have relative protection from the environment and from outside invaders. But if you're a Bantu group, you're going to be relatively isolated. And each one of those isolated groups of people is going to be much more dependent on each other. Someone needs to farm. Someone needs to be the builder. Someone needs to potentially go gather food, depending on where you are. And so this reliance on the group, or a group-centered mentality, begins to emerge. And then it's something that you're going to reinforce. And it'll usually be very strict. And that's where we get the old 90s cliche, at least when I was coming up, this idea of it takes a village to raise a child. And while in the United States, that's oftentimes given a little side eye when you hear somebody say that, in traditional African societies, that's not just something you say to sound like woke. That's something that you live. It's a duty to other people. The reliance on the group is literally survival. So the social contract, or the idea of how do you and I get along with each other, is based on need and the ability to meet each other's needs. Whereas in the United States, we tend to hoard our resources. What's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. We don't have a relative need for each other. So we get these different values that tend to emerge, right? So this is a really good point. We're about halfway through the presentation. We've hit various slides. We're about halfway through that list of objectives. So here's what we would like you to do as a student. We're going to pause this video, and you're going to get a little think and writing time. Then we're going to push you out into some breakout rooms to have some discussion time. And then we're going to bring you back together, and we're going to talk through what your discussion should have looked like and your notes should have looked like. And we'll talk about the answer to this question. Why do you think that traditional African societies focus more on tribe and not on the individual? All right. So again, you'll be able to find that question in the chat as well if you didn't get it during the presentation. Go ahead, start answering that question by using your notes, and then we will bounce you into a discussion breakout room, and then we will come back together. So we'll see you back here in a couple minutes. Go ahead and have some think time. Welcome back. We're here. So hopefully you guys had a dynamic and robust conversation. Now we have some different things as teachers that we want you to think about your thinking and actions. And so we're going to call these meta moments. So Mrs. Dumas, what's the first sort of meta idea that we wanted students to kind of consider as they came out of that activity?
Well, I think what we want them to do is combine the information that they've learned from the first 5 slides and really see the pattern and really see the connection, because that's what we want you to do in AP World. So if I were to take the geography of the map slide and then take the information from the Bantu migrations along with common cultural values, what I would hope students would be able to see is, as a result of some relatively harsh geography in Africa, definitely some polar opposites of geography, and a result of the Bantu migrations, we see this common set of African values, most of which rely on the group, and that it's going to be a group effort, and that the group is more important than the individual. So if you have people living in the rainforest, or you have people living on the edge of the Saharan desert, understanding that those geographical areas led to a lot of restrictions, which made it darn near impossible for an individual, or even a small group of individuals, to be able to survive by themselves. So you had to have the group working together in order to survive, and then hopefully eventually thrive. And so that need then eventually manifests itself as a common cultural value in sub-Saharan Africa.
Absolutely. And then if we want to kick those answers up a notch, we can start to think about some of the variations in African culture and why we don't have one pan sub-Saharan African culture is that we have each one of these, what historians might call a diaspora, or a small group of people living in an area. Over a period of time, their culture is going to adjust to the realities of what they're living around. That social contract will be changed. Those needs change. And then one of the things that we can pull away from this is, from a critical thinking standpoint, if we were to project out in the future, why did Africans, specifically sub-Saharan African civilizations, lag behind from like Western European or East Asian civilizations from a technological standpoint? That relative isolation and that need to continue to meet the needs of other people, that group mentality, often engenders or creates a sense of conservatism. Taking big risks can have huge rewards, but it could also have dire consequences. And so a civilization might not take the risk to invest in new technologies or new modes of production, because the outcome could be disastrous on the whole. And so that tends to breed a little bit more conservatism, and that leads to a widening gulf between various regions of the globe over time. All right. So when we use these notes, when we start applying this information, again, it's past knowledge. Once we get into application, critical thinking and synthesis become the key modalities of thinking for you to be successful in this class.
You're using some big words there, Mr. Breen.
I'm all over. I got to drop a little knowledge.
That's nice. Now, is there going to be a change in Africa? Is something going to happen that's going to lead to actually some pretty dramatic African development?
Yeah, let's go further north again, because we've been pushing south on our map. So let's go back up north into that region where the Bantu peoples left, and we're going to see a big change in terms of how those people lived. So go ahead and click that slide, and let's check out what's next. Dun, 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 dun. In North and West Africa, we start to see the development of very different cultural patterns, economic processes, and political identities as a direct result of the Trans Saharan Trade Route. Now, the Trans Saharan Trade Route is it's like connective tissue for different regional cities and different areas of both the Mediterranean, East Africa, and West Africa to come together and share resources, and at the same time, share culture and share political understandings. And so West Africa, because it's much more connected than sub-Saharan Africa, starts to see the development of a brand new set of cultural ideas, which we'll get into in a second. And a lot of this is the result of the movement of these people called the Berbers. And the Berbers are like the long-haul truckers of the Trans-Saharan Trade Route, right? Now, no person went from like point A, like Cairo, all the way to Ghana, point Z, and hit every single stop along the way. The distance is too vast. The journey is too perilous. It's just not something that most people did. And I know there's some student out here who's like, what about Ibn Fadlan? And like, yeah, you're right. Good job. Or Ibn Battuta. Yes, Ibn Battuta as well. But most people did not do the entire trade route. All right. That would be like driving every single day from New York to LA, or every 3-4 days, and then back again, back and forth. It'd be a lot easier just to go from like New York to like somewhere in Pennsylvania, and then somebody else could take the items to Chicago to, Kansas City to Denver, yada, yada, yada. And that's what the Trans-Saharan Trade Route is. It's like blockchain movement. You have one to the next, to the next, to the next, right? And all of these people are going to be brought together because there are various resources, specifically gold and salt, that are very, very useful to people all across the greater Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Southern European worlds. So let's hop into some of these different cultures and see how the Trans-Saharan Trade Route influenced cultural development.
So I think one of the biggest impacts that the Trans-Saharan Trade Route has is the development of West African empires. Now, we know that African history did not start like 300 CE. We know we trace it all the way back to Egypt and the Nile and pharaohs, which is super interesting history, but that really was the development of North Africa. With the Trans-Saharan Trade Route, now we're going to see the development and growth of West Africa, and specifically the rise of two kingdoms, Ghana and Mali. Now, Ghana is important because it is the first major West African kingdom, lasts from about 300 to 1200, and it does develop as a direct result of this Trans-Saharan Trade Route. And the reason that it becomes so valuable is because of the resources that Mr. Breen previously pointed out. salt, and gold. Now, everybody knows why gold is valuable. All right. It's bullion, it's hard currency. I wish I had a bunch of it right now. But why? Why is salt so valuable, especially between 300 and 1200? Mr. Breen, why do you think that's true?
Let's give the kids a second real quick. I want them to write down an answer just so they can see how they did. So take a second, write it in your notes on hand. Like, I think it's important because here comes the answer. Salt is important because in the years 300 to 1200 CE, we don't have a centralized power grid, we don't have electricity, and we don't have refrigerators. So if you want your food to not spoil, if you want your meat to stay fresh and not become rancid, if you want your vegetables to not rot, and you don't want your fruit to liquefy, you need to find a way to cure it. And so you take the salt, pack the salt into the food stuff, and all of a sudden your food will last a lot longer. And if you're making long journeys across deserts, which people are doing, or if you're engaging in maritime trade where you're sailing from great distances, having some salt at your disposal would be really, really, really good. And there just happens to be a massive salt deposit in West Africa that was easily mineable and could be pushed out from Africa to the greater Eurasian world.
Well said, Mr. Breen. Well said. On a side, totally tangential, has nothing to do with world history, except the fact that you can apply lessons from world history. If there is ever a zombie apocalypse, knowing how to preserve food with salt is going to be an extremely valuable skill. So thank you, West Africa. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to learn from you. Now, Ghana is... I know, seriously. Ghana is the first empire, but it's probably not the most influential empire in West Africa. The most influential is going to be Mali. And it's great. Like Sundiata Keita is the first Mansa. He's the creator of Mali, the first king of the Malian Empire. But the guy that we really want to focus on, because he is super cool, is this guy, Mansa Musa. And boy, does he change West Africa a lot. And you are going to learn how much when you hit pause on this video, click on the YouTube link that we provide you in the Africa folder in Schoology and watch this delightful music video on Mansa Musa. So what we want you to do is once you hit pause, go to Schoology, click on the link for the Mansa music video in the African folder of week 2. Watch the music video and take notes on how Mansa Musa influenced, changed, developed West African society. So that's what we want you to do now. So go, click on that link, watch the video, take the notes, and when you're done, come on back. So you're back, and you've watched one of the most, I think, entertaining musical videos of all time. I am singing it in my head, Mr. Breen. I am singing it in my head.
My best dad teacher thing that I can do.
I know, I totally dig this music video. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put you back in breakout rooms, and you are going to share how you think Mansa Musa influenced African culture. So these are going to be short breakout rooms, no more than 5 minutes. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Breen.
I was going to say influence again. Influence in this case means change or develop. Okay, so this is a dynamic verb. So we're talking about something changing here. So center your conversation around that idea of change.
All right, we're sending you to the rooms now. Hit pause on this video, and when you're done, come on back. So you're back again. Boy, we are just back and forth, aren't we?
Got to do it.
So you probably have discussed a lot about Mansa Musa. And Mr. Breen, what are some of the key points do you think they should have gotten out of the video?
Well, some of the things that we're going to want to know about Mansa Musa is his great development of wealth. All right, we'll talk a little bit about his wealth, but the concentration of education and culture in the great city of Timbuktu, and how Timbuktu rises up as a regional powerhouse and becomes really an epicenter of education, of wealth display, and of Islamic culture, which is something that he brings to the fore inside of his empire and pushes on his subjects as a means of sociocultural cohesion, bringing people together. What about you?
I agree with you. I definitely think that education is a huge, huge part of it. The bringing of Islam, which we're not talking about yet, but the bringing of Islam into the culture is hugely important. And I think no better place is representative of what Mansa Musa was able to do than the city of Timbuktu.
Now, Timbuktu is awesome. I mean, all right. So there's a couple things about this city. First of all, we've talked about this off camera, but I'm going to do it on camera too. That Lego set is lit. I want
Seriously.
that. I mean, I've got some pretty awesome. I'll try to find a way. If it's on this forum, then I'll show some of my Legos from history. But I want that Lego set. I'm
Oh
going to
my
find
God.
a way either to make it or buy it. Either way, I'm
So
getting one.
so much. And we are a Lego household. Like, I can't tell you how many Lego sets. It's taken over the basement. But oh my gosh, well, I just need this. I need this.
I agree. It's awesome.
Okay, all right.
It's awesome. Now, it's more, Timbuktu is more than just an awesome Lego city. It was an actual place. And the city of Timbuktu becomes really the epicenter of not just the African world, but in a lot of ways, the the West Mediterranean world, because it's not a huge distance from North Europe into the heart of the Malayan Empire. And at its core is this city that's based in education, that's dynamic. It's got a lot of trade going on. Mansa Musa was very clever in that he kept a lot of the gold and a lot of the precious resources that people might want inside of the city. So if you wanted to trade, you had to come actually into Timbuktu. And then once you arrived in Timbuktu and you traded, you had to pay taxes and any sort of duties, and you'd reinvest that money into the city. And then the money was also reinvested by the political elite into the city to build up educational universities, or what we're seeing here in the Lego diagram, or in the bottom left-hand corner, the Great Mosque at Djenné. And one of the things that's pretty cool about this building is it's not just an Islamic building. A mosque is an Islamic house of worship, but it also shows some of those strong Bantu building styles. We've got the mud brick, we've got the logs protruding out of the sides of the building, which are there for support, but they're also there for decoration. The minarets have much more of a regional feel to them. This mosque doesn't look like a mosque that might exist in the Middle East. And when we start talking about Greater Dar al-Islam, we'll see a very specific style emerge in the Middle East. But in West Africa, we have this variation of traditional Bantu culture on one side, Islamic culture on the other. They're mashed together, and a new culture emerges. And then we call this syncretism or syncretic culture, right? And we'll talk a lot about this idea in future videos, but this is a great example of cultural syncretism, the development of something new using something old. All right. Now, again, walking away from this slide, really make sure that you focus on the educational piece, because not just great mosques, but also madrasas, or university schools where students are taught about Islamic culture, learn Islamic texts, and become Islamic leaders, are also sponsored inside of Timbuktu, which starts to bring more people in, and that cycle continues. And all of this leads to Mansa Musa becoming the richest man in world history. Sorry, Bezos, but that whole first 200 billion, like whatever thing that came out this week, he's not the richest man in human history. Mansa Musa was and will continue to be.
Mr. Barine, we have a ding ding moment. And for those of you, this is your first video, a ding 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 moment means that we're going to tell you something that is almost 100% going to be on the AP exam. There has not been a single AP World exam that has not included the mosque at Djenné. So this mosque down here, know it, memorize that picture. They are going to ask you a question about religious syncretism because of this mosque. So ding 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 that into your memory.
For sure. All right. So at this point in time, we're at a place where we're going to kind of summarize Mali and summarize the learning that should have taken place. So just as we did before, the link to this YouTube video will be posted in Schoology for you. You can go back and revise your notes on your Malayan Empire knowledge. I have just a couple quick recaps from Mali that I know are going to be really important. You touched on the first one already, the importance of the Great Mosque at Djenné. and what it represents. But we also want to just really like solidify in our minds that Mali was highly politically organized. And we know that. We have the Mansas that you referenced, the kings. We have the Trans Saharan Trade Route, which would show us a high degree of economic organization and a system based on barter-based trade and taxation. We have the cultural values brought in by Berber traders who were Muslims and brought the religion into North Africa. And we'll talk a lot more about the spread of that Islam into all regions in a future presentation. And then finally, we have the development of schools and university and education. And this can be seen as a socio-cultural system. All of this to say that Timbuktu is an elite city. It's a world-class city at this time period. And that's one of the things that Africa surely does not get enough play for during this time period, is the fact that it was as good as anything that the Middle East had to offer, anything that you could find in China, and far exceeds anything you're going to see in Europe.
Way to go, Africa. Way to go. Now, Mr. Breen, we've only really specifically talked about West Africa, but there are other important regions that we are going to get into.
Yes.
And what are those regions?
All right. So down in South and in Eastern Africa, we're going to see the development of two major civilizational like hubs, right? And then we are also going to see the development of some unique cultural civilizations in Africa as well. So down in, if you see it, it's got the blue E field. It's circled here on the map. That is Ethiopia. Ethiopia is going to be unique in the South and Eastern African world because it is going to be a Christian empire. Now we're talking like old school Coptic Christians. There's a lot of linkage between some Bible lore and the Ethiopian people. This Christian heritage will be played up later on when Europeans come back into Africa, and it becomes a linking point for trade between European traders and people who are familiar with Christian peoples when culture is a passport for trade and interaction. Then if we go further south in that orangish region, we see the development of the civilization called Great Zimbabwe and the trading cities that develop along Africa's Gold Coast. The Gold Coast of Africa is the Indian Ocean coast. And that's where a lot of trade will take place with Southeast Asian and East Asian civilizations, bringing a whole mess of goods into Africa, which will eventually start to make their way further north and kind of complete this loop of trade that starts to exist in the Indian Ocean. But that's another place, another time. The one thing that's pretty cool about this, and it says so on our slide, is not all great cities that developed in Africa had that Islamic feel or that Christian feel. Great Zimbabwe is a Bantu migration-based people. So this, the city of Great Zimbabwe and what's taking place in Great Zimbabwe is uniquely African. It doesn't have a lot of influence from anywhere else.
Well, that's it for today from us. Thank you so much for joining us on our lecture on Africa. We hope that you learned a lot. And until next time, we will see you later.
Bye.